Just a note for our listeners, this episode features discussions of suicide, alcoholism, gambling, and domestic violence. Hello, I'm your host, Abby Feltham, and you are listening to the New Beginnings podcast, a series for women experiencing gambling harms and for anyone who'd like to learn and know more about the issue. New Beginnings is brought to you by Bet No More UK gambling support charity, providing peer-led services, including our women's only programme, New Beginnings, as part of the National Gambling Support Network. To find out more, please visit our website, www.betnomoreuk.org. Whether you're listening as an individual who has been affected by gambling harms, someone who feels it's getting out of hand, or you're a concerned family member or friend, don't worry, this is a safe space. Today's topics and stories shared will have details of gambling harms, mentions of various forms of harm and addiction, and scenarios that some listeners may find triggering. If this is you, please contact the free National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020133 for 24/7 support. On this week's episode, we will be discussing a topic that I think affects us all: negative thoughts and self-doubt. For women in recovery from gambling harms, it's something that can hinder or stop a recovery journey altogether. And as a woman in recovery myself, I make a point to document my negative thoughts and how I deal with them. And in doing this, I hope women in similar situations don't feel isolated or alone. So on today's episode, I'd like to welcome Julie Martin. Hi, Julie.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Hi, it's lovely to meet you too. Julie is a peer aid coordinator for the Peer Aid Service Aftercare programme, which is in partnership with Beacon Counselling Trust. Julie, I'd like to hear more from you yourself. You work in the gambling recovery sector. How did you get into it and why?
Most of it is because of my lived experience. I've been in the gambling harm sector now for 3 years. I've worked with a number of charities dealing with awareness, prevention, and now peer support for those who have been affected by gambling harm.
Fantastic. Can you explain to me what is a peer aid service and how does it work?
Peer support is a service that provides a holistic support for anybody in recovery or an affected other, so somebody who hasn't gambled but has been affected by gambling. We provide the health and well-being and holistic support for somebody to be able to move forward with their lives after gambling harms, to be able to set goals and help them to find their own solutions to starting a new life with a better, healthier, happier outlook on it.
So on the topic of negative thoughts, what kind of what would be an example of a gambler's negative thought, a gambler who is wanting to abstain?
I think a majority of gamblers and potentially affected others as well find they have a period of time that they feel guilt. There is obviously the stigma that is very, hard to work through. Also, the fact that they feel they wish they could have done things differently. They wish they could have said things differently. And it all holds a legacy of harm that they need to work through the understandings of that and be able to accept that that was part of their life. And now they're looking to move forward onto somewhere that's happy, healthier and happier.
It's such an important thing to address because, that shame really gets in the way because you enter the shame cycle and, you go back to your destructive habits. And I think it's important to note that those sort of thoughts are completely normal.
Oh, they are, absolutely. And I would say probably, I don't like to put figures on it, but if you look at 2/3, maybe even more of the peers that we work with, both in peer aid and in aftercare, will all, whether they be in recovery or affected others, feel those same kind of emotions. It's a very difficult path that we have to work through, and a journey that does not just disappear over 6-10 weeks. It's a legacy of gambling harm that we need to learn to live with in just everyday life.
Absolutely. What would you say are like the signs that women who are recovering from gambling harm should look out for?
I think myself as an affected other, as I went through the pathway of my journey, I hid so much of our personal story. I kept it quiet for years, didn't tell anybody. I struggled with debt. I had to financially try and support the family whilst my husband was gambling. I had the worry of finding money for food. I had to hide the fact that I was under so much stress from friends and family. It was an extremely difficult time watching somebody that you loved go through something that you couldn't control, that you, as much as you tried to help them with, you couldn't change their mindset or change their pathway, when knowing that you had to change your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of think when you start hiding things from people in your support network and people who love you, you know, that's I know for me personally, recovering from alcoholism, like I knew that I was an alcoholic for many years, but when I recognized that it was a major problem and it was, you know, getting out of hand, when I realized that I was hiding everything from the people who loved me, I was hiding all this like destruction I was doing in my life. And it just made it worse, really, because I was just keeping secrets, really. And that's just so destructive.
Didn't you? Yeah, and didn't you find it exhausting? It's absolutely exhausting to live like a fake life, a hidden life. So you're pretending to be someone else out there with your friends and your family. Inside, you're falling apart. Inside, you're not coping. The stress levels are massive. You're dealing with things that nobody understands, or you think that nobody would understand. And it's a very, very isolating situation to be in.
And for women who are in recovery, like what should they be looking out for in terms of managing negative thoughts and self-doubt?
Whether you're in recovery from an actual gambling disorder or even an affected other, I think self-doubt is something that can creep into your life quite easily. That may come from your guilt, your remorse, or your stigma from gambling. It may come as a woman, as an affected other, from potentially the domestic abuse. I personally had quite a lot of verbal, mental, and in the end, physical domestic abuse. And both of those things, whether in recovery or as an affected other, can have quite a toll on your mental health. Your self doubt becomes quite massive. You start believing the narrative and thinking that you're not worthy, you're not a good person, you're not you haven't behaved properly or done the right things, which obviously isn't true. So it's being able to get to a place through that you start believing in yourself again and start knowing who you are, truly who you are, and the fact that you cannot listen to other people's opinions, other people's thoughts on you, because only you know your true story, and you need to believe in yourself, and you need to know that you are a better person.
It's so important. That's so important to, you know, think about.
Absolutely.
Do you have any, like, as a peer supporter, do you have any like specific techniques that you like suggest to people you work with?
Um, we don't have a lot of it is about allowing that person to find their own path. We don't come at it with any kinds of opinions. We are totally non-judgmental. We want to use motivation, we want to use empathy, we want to use our lived experience to ensure that the people that we look, the peers that we support, whether recovery or affected other, think about their own lives. We help them rethink their own paths, make their own decisions, and hopefully those choices will be better choices and healthier choices for their future.
I'm interested to know, for someone who is struggling to manage like their negative thoughts and self-doubt, what other services or resources are available to them?
Yeah, we have, with Peer Aid, we have health and wellbeing groups for our peers, so they can come into groups as well as their one-to-one sessions and have the opportunity to discuss how they're feeling, join other people with similar lived experiences, and help each other work through self-doubt, or give each other ideas to how to change their lives. May it be mindfulness, exercise, simple things like taking time to listen to the music that you enjoy. We all have exceptionally busy lives. We have families, we have things that get in our way, but the most important thing, I think, is finding time for yourself, finding that, just whether it be 15, 20 minutes a day, to take yourself for that walk or listen to that podcast or read that book, and those things that just take your mind away from everyday situations, the stresses or strains that you're under. And if you're using the right types of things to read and listen to, you can lift yourself from those self-doubt thoughts.
Amazing. That's such great advice. I think we all kind of tend to forget about ourselves.
Absolutely.
So we've spoken about women experiencing gambling harms, but I'm interested to know how someone who is an affected other can manage their negative thoughts. So if you're comfortable sharing your own experiences as an affected other, could you let us know how you managed as a mother and a wife and as a friend?
If I'm honest, I struggled for many years. I have lived experience of potentially 20 to 25 years. I didn't realise at the time when I met and married my husband that he had a gambling disorder already. It only really came out probably about 15 years ago, when the children were 7 and 11. And I found ourselves in a severe amount of debt. That left me with a 7 and 11-year-old juggling 5 credit cards, trying to move them around to 0% interest, having no money to buy food, not being able to discuss this with anybody else because the shame of loving somebody so much that could do this to you, could do this to their children, was just, I couldn't understand how this man, who was a good father, a hard worker, an intelligent person, could bring us to that level. It just didn't. I couldn't understand it, and my mental health suffered. The stress that I was put under during that time, as well as living with somebody whose mental health was not good because of their gambling disorder, was extremely hard. I just tried to protect the children. I tried to hide as much as I could from them. I never shared with anybody, until unfortunately it came to a point of some threats to my own life, that I then turned for help. I then had to open up to everybody, which was so hard. But I had a domestic abuse charity help me. I went to GAM Care at that time. I mean, we're talking 15 years ago, and got some really lovely support through a online, like, telephone counsellor. But it was an extremely difficult time, especially when my husband was not acknowledging his gambling issues, and as much as I tried to get him help, he wasn't interested. And we separated for a matter of probably about 6 months. But because the children were young, and because I had great values in my family and in my marriage, and with the promises that it would never happen again. We then got back together and we had a really good few years. He really did work exceptionally hard to try and pay off all the debts. We had to remortgage the house. It was a difficult time, but a time that we worked together, for a period. But unfortunately, probably in about 2018, 19, I started to see the same traits, the changes in his behaviour, the changes in his moods, and realised he was gambling again, which took us up to lockdown during the pandemic. And unfortunately, then we were just the three of us, myself, my son, and my daughter. She'd come home from university because of COVID. Lived upstairs in our small 3-bedroomed house for the whole of the lockdown because my husband just took over downstairs 12 hours a day, gambling online, drinking. His mental health hit the floor. It was a really, really difficult time for us all. And it just escalated to a point that once my daughter had gone back to university, he hadn't gone back to work because of COVID, and he worked in the hospitality industry. And unfortunately, it just meant that he just declined so much and so quickly that unfortunately he was then arrested for assaulting me. And we were then separated by a restraining order for a number of months, which accumulated in us as a family still trying to get him help, still trying to get him to realise what he was going through. But unfortunately, nothing worked. And sadly, he took his life in November of 2021. Which has left myself and my children, who are now 18 and 23, in a place that is confusing, is very emotional, is very difficult, because we have so many unanswered questions, so many whys. Why weren't we enough? Why didn't you love us enough to stay and get help? Why did he not speak out? So, but in saying that, as we say about negative thoughts and self-doubt, I've had to overcome so many negative thoughts and so much self-doubt that some of it he put on me and some of it I've put on myself through my own guilt. Could I have done more? Could I have said more? But working with my children and working in the gambling harm sector and getting to know some wonderful people and listening to other people's lived experience, I know that I've done enough, and I know that we were enough. And it was the gambling harm and the mental health that it brings that took him to that dark place. It wasn't us. So it's been a difficult learning curve. It's been a really hard journey. But, I'm so proud of my children. They are amazing adults now. They're doing so well, considering, a good 10 years of their childhood was taken up by gambling harm. I hope I'm doing a good job. I hope I've come into something that I can make a difference with now. And you have to think positively. How else do we carry on? I had to think positive thoughts for my children. They'd already lost a parent. Didn't matter what I'd been through. Was I going to allow them to lose another one? Absolutely not. Because I know that I deserve a life and I deserve happiness, and so do they.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing Your story is wow. You've been through a lot, and you're such an inspiration to come out the other side and to be helping other people with your experience. Just to round up today's episode, I have one last question. What piece of advice would you have for anyone who is struggling to manage their negative thoughts?
Seek help. Find somebody to talk to. Share those negative thoughts out loud. I speak to so many women who say every day, I can't, it's only me. It's just me. It's not just you. There are so many of us, whether you are a gambler, you're a gambler in recovery, you're an affected other. We all feel the same. We all have those same feelings. And just reach out, contact Bet No More, contact other, charities, and share those experiences, because there will be people that are there and they're willing to listen to you and they will help you.
Julie, thank you so much for coming on today's show and for sharing your story and all your advice. And thank you to all our listeners. Managing your negative thinking whilst navigating the experience of gambling harms as an individual or as an affected other, can feel very isolating. And making the changes to abstain and improve your quality of life will come with self-doubt because you're doing something new and unfamiliar, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. You're on the right path, and recovery takes time and patience. And we hope you have enjoyed listening to today's episode. If you have been affected by any of the topics covered in today's episode, please contact the National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020 133 for 24/7 support. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to like, comment, and share. You can find the New Beginnings podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. And to watch the episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Bet No More UK. If you have been affected by any of the other topics mentioned in this episode, the Samaritans are available for support. Call them on 116 123.